Hey, this is Chris from CSS Tricks, and we're going to get started here on this big V10 redesign. So I wanted to start in Photoshop a little bit here. I know there's a lot of talk and a lot of very valid reasons for all this design in the browser kind of stuff, and I'm actually a big fan of it. I quite like the idea of getting to writing, the front end code as quick as possible. It's easier to iterate on. It's more realistic. It's the final product, really. It deals with all the flexibility, all that cool stuff in the web is there. But honestly, I still like starting in Photoshop for some of the visual design work, just for exploration. I said once a long time ago, and I kind of still believe this, is that, for lack of a better word, when I'm working in Photoshop, I feel a little more right-brained, if that's a thing. I know that there's some scientific, it's not like all of our creative powers is on the right side of our brain and all of our analytical powers is on the other side of our brain. It may not break down that simply, but I think that way. I think I'm more creative when I can just focus on these creative tools and drag stuff around and not be limited by code. I think when you start in HTML, you're thinking about the specific possibilities of that, what the code can do, kind of stuff. So we're faced with this. We're faced with the blank canvas of the great redesign. We've looked at, all the different content that exists on the site. We've taken inventory and we've listed some goals and stuff. And now it's time to do some visual design work that's going to lead the direction of this. And to be perfectly honest, I've done a little bit of this already. Most of this screencast series is literally going to be like real time me figuring out this stuff. But before this Kickstarter thing even started, and before any of that, what kind of sparked all this was some playing around in Photoshop for a redesign that kind of got me excited about this. So sometimes that early just poking around stuff gives you the fire that you need to get started. So this is a little intimidating, right? The white of a canvas, and there's nothing there. Gosh, what are we gonna do? We could go look at cstricks.com and see what's there now, and then come over here and be like, how are we gonna take this and just redesign it? Where do we even start? The whiteness can be a little intimidating. So one of the things I like to do is I love texture. Every version of CSS Tricks has used some kind of texture or background thing. These stripes on this current design are kind of like the least texturized thing that I've ever done on CSS Tricks. I love texture. I'm sure most of you have heard of this, but if you haven't, I just love this site, subtlepatterns.com. It seems like a trend, like noise was a trend, like that kind of grainy texture back here, and now it's kind of noise plus little patterns. It seems like a little bit of a trend, but I just don't care. I love it. I feel like it's going to be a very long-lasting trend, a very worthwhile trend is to, instead of completely flat backgrounds, use flat backgrounds when you need it, like this text here is set on flat white, but behind it just kind of ease the site in. It just feels a little better when there's a little texture going on. They're used a ton in native Mac apps, and I'm sure across platform there's lots of textures going around in design lately, and it just feels good. Way of separating content. Anyway, I just should shut up about that, but I love this site, Subtle Patterns. The way I like to browse it is in thumbnails. And look at it. Here's the classic OS X fabric stuff now. Lines and grids and noise and fabric and wood. There's tons of this little Escher kind of things. These are just really nice, really versatile patterns for stuff. And I was browsing around in here and I found one that I really liked, a kind of dark one. Where did I find that? It was called Classy Fabric or something. Yeah, Classy Fabric. Here it is. I just really liked it. It wasn't super, super dark. It was just kind of a dark gray, and I like those kind of dark grays. You can hit preview and kind of see this site with that fabric on it. I quite like this one. So if you hit download now, you kind of get a version of this to play with, and you can just use that on the site. That's where this whole thing started pretty much. I was like, I want to redesign the site. Let me just, instead of looking at white, the intimidating white here, let's just get a pattern going here. So I can define pattern. I'll just call it Classy Fabric. I selected all in here and just went image, define pattern. So now I can reuse that in a tiling manner. So I could double click on background to kind of unlock it, and then double click it again and get layer styles and say pattern overlay, which gives you the crazy alien eggs by default. And then the last one I just added will be at the end here. Classy fabric. Wow, so I have this tiling cool fabric now. It's less intimidating than the white. I think that kind of looks good. That's how you can use these patterns in Photoshop. They're really easy to use on the web, because on the web you just set the background image to this graphic and you just say background repeat, or it defaults to that when you use the background shorthand property in CSS. You don't even need to. But in Photoshop, you gotta go through the trouble of creating a pattern. And this is what I did. The first thing that got me really excited about this project was like this big orange square in the upper corner. I was like, CSS Tricks, that's kind of namesake color is orange. And I took that pattern and I took a big orange thing in the upper left, and I was like, that is awesome. I like how the orange and gray play off each other. That feels very CSS Tricks brandy. And I was like, well, we're not going to like set text on this fabric. This is just kind of the background as CSS Tricks has classically been. And I'm just going to kind of make a arbitrary another area here that's white. That's kind of going to be where we set the content of the site. And that's kind of like where I started with the visual design for this redesign. I was like, I like this so much, this kind of big orange block up here that will basically act as kind of the branding for CSS Tricks. CSS Tricks is orange, and there's this huge, it looks very magazine-like and strong in this like kind of unmistakable way. Just literally some fabric and some overlapping squares, and that's where kind of this whole thing is like, I'm going to redesign the site, and this is going to be the overall aesthetic that I use for it. So CSS Tricks is the name of the site. It's in the current design, uses Gotham Rounded, a font by Hoffler, Farrar & Jones, a typography.com. It is an all caps kind of deal. So let's turn on our character here. Get our character palette going. You can just click this to make it all caps, and it uses the bold variety of this font. Or does it? Maybe it's regular or medium. Yeah, I can just tell. Of course, it's not green. But it's a gray. The tricks part is white. Just know from the branding of this site. And this is kind of a gray. Maybe we can sample one from there. Yeah, there we go. So the cool thing is here, I really wish we could use Gotham Rounded as a web font. Unfortunately, Hoffler, Farrar & Jones, at the time I'm talking here, is kind of working on web fonts, and there's a few experimental sites like Kottke.org is using Hoffler, Farrar & Jones. Whitney, which looks really good. I think SimpleBits.com is using some fonts from there. I saw like a Jessica Hish site that was trying some new ones that I hadn't seen before. But in general, there's no public web font service for their fonts. So we can look around. The advantage to using a web font for this is look at how simple it is. It's just a font, and it will look great on all this high resolution stuff that we're talking about recently. Or because it's flat, I could make it into vector. I could use SVG for this logo. And I'm mentioning this now is because just recently for this redesign, I have the new Retina MacBook Pro, and I'm all excited about it, and it's high res and Retina and everything looks really good on it. But if I were to just like slice this thing out in Photoshop at this size and save a JPEG of it or whatever on a high resolution screen, it would kind of look bad. Or if I served a very large version of it and shrinked it down, which is kind of part of what Retina is all about, it would just be high bandwidth for everybody, which isn't what I want. Anyway, I'm talking too long about this logo, but I want the logo to look good and sharp on all screens. And this is such a simple branding that looks so strong to me that I think we'll be able to get away with. Maybe we'll figure out a way to use web fonts. Maybe we won't use Gotham Rounded. We'll use, a different variety font that looks similar. Actually, I've explored a few, so there's a few that look pretty good. So we'll see if we'll end up compromising and using something else, or if we'll figure out a way to get in early on this Hoffler, Farrar & Jones web font thing, or what. But that's a good looking start to the aesthetic of this website. And now I feel way less intimidated. We have this to start with. We have this simple framework to start with. And we can build out some visual design from here. So I think we'll stay in Photoshop for a little bit, build out some navigation, maybe build out a few more pages, and then get out of Photoshop. And be like, we've done our visual exploration. Let's get this thing in code so it's easier. But we'll stay in Photoshop for just a little bit longer.